Okay, well, welcome to the John Stark public hearing. As you know, we start our budget process in the summer. We begin or continue, we look to our strategic plan. We look at what our curriculum needs are, what individual student needs are through the IEP process. We look at enrollment, we look at our CIP and look at building needs, and we collaborate through the fall to develop a budget. And so the driving forces and ideas behind our budget and behind that process are that we seek to address the academic, social, and emotional needs of our students. That's first and foremost. Along with, and this is representative of our Portrait of a Learner, which was developed last year by our community, we want to support our students in becoming respectful collaborators, effective communicators, and knowledgeable problem solvers and creators. We want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of each of our learners. And I think baked into how we do business is we're looking, and I apologize for the dogs barking in the background, we focus on continuous improvement, be it through our PLCs where teachers look at their practice and discuss the impact it's having on student achievement, to my admin team in our meetings where we look at is what we're doing working to support our students, and are we doing it in the most efficient way possible to be mindful of taxpayers. As you all know, and as the previous discussion illuminated, this has been quite a year. And so on reflecting on that year, COVID presented so many challenges. And throughout it, we tried to balance conflicting needs. I said to somebody this past week, there really aren't right answers here. There are just competing needs that have to be calibrated and then recalibrated, and there is so little certainty, and we're just all trying to navigate it together. And we have this goal of connecting with students each day, and I've seen so many examples of creativity, community, kindness, even through disagreements on how things should be done and how we should navigate challenges, whether we should be remote for an additional week. And through all of that, I see people striving to care for one another. And so for that reason, I'm incredibly proud to be part of this community. I'm incredibly proud of the people who work in this district and for how we've been able to rise to the challenges that have been presented to us and that we're all going through together. So tonight, I'm here to talk about really Articles 3, 4, and 5. Our budget is Article 3. Article 4 is the collective bargaining agreement negotiated with our Teachers Association. And then the last one deals with a contingency fund, establishing a contingency fund. We are currently operating under a budget of $13,735,372. The proposed budget that we're putting forth is $14,425,926. That is a $690,533 increase, or a 5.03% from the current budget. The default budget is just a little bit shy of that, $14,424,397. That increase, that 5.03 increase, 2.37% of that, almost half of that, reflects an accounting change that we put in place. John Stark students have always been supported by the IDEA grant. The IDEA grant is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it supports students who have additional needs that need to be addressed. and so as I said, we've always, and John Stark students have always had access to these funds. They were, and they actually currently this year are, those funds are consolidated at the SAU. What we're seeking to do, and what we believe is the right way to do this, is to have the funds that are used to support John Stark students in the John Stark budget. In order to spend something through a budget, you need to put it into your budget. And so that's why there's a $325,000 increase to the budget. That increase represents us taking the funds from the consolidated grant and building it into the John Stark budget. It does not increase taxes locally. So if you take from our proposed budget the $690,553 increase, subtract the $325,000 that doesn't have a tax impact, we're dealing with a $553.93 or a 2.66% increase. That's still a pretty big increase. And given that we were really striving to come in recognizing the times that we're living in. The other factor that had a really big impact on our budget this year is a change, a rate change for the New Hampshire Retirement Fund. Right now we are contributing for our teachers 17.8% of their salary into the New Hampshire Retirement Fund. That's the employer contribution rate. Next year, that rate increases to 21.02%. So there's a 3.22% increase on the salary line. At John Stark, salaries and benefits make up 70% of our budget. So this is a big number. So the increase with tax impact is a 2.66% increase. 1.28% of that is that mandatory retirement contribution rate change. Our healthcare premiums also increased. Last year, we were, I think, fortunate to come into these budget discussions with a negative GMR. The GMR is the guaranteed maximum rate that our health care premiums will be increased. And so we went into this knowing there was going to be a cut within the healthcare lines. We go into this conversation this year knowing that our healthcare premiums will not increase more than 7.3%. 7.3% is what we need to budget for. That is $58,810. Other increases, the ones in black, are in the default budget. We've got our SAU district shares. The SAU, there's a calculation based on enrollment and equalized value that gets formulated each year, and the SAU budget gets charged back to the districts. The SAU saw some increases that related to our retirement and healthcare at the SAU. The other increase that was approved by the SAU board was an additional technology position at the SAU. So that increase is the $52,197. The contracted services line, if you go through the object budget, actually, if you go through either budget, function or object, the contracted services line is, you're going to see probably the biggest increase within the whole budget. That $352,851, there's some salary increases. There is speech, our speech contracted service, which is built into IEPs. But the biggest increase is the program that we started this year at John Stark that enabled us to bring back some students who are in out-of-district placement. So although it's a big increase, it is partially offset by a cut in our out-of-district placement line, our out-of-district tuition, and also our special education transportation. We send our students to CRTC, and they go and they participate in some really wonderful programs there. There was an increase in the tuition line, and there was an increase in the transportation. We also had some increases in our general transportation lines. So all of those equal more than what we're presenting as a budget. And so what you'll also see is $300,000 worth of cuts within our proposed budget that offset these. I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. So our default budget, a default budget is a formula. It consists of our current year budget minus one-time expenditures, plus or minus contractual obligations, and anything related, mandated by law. So our default budget this year is $14,424,398. That is $1,528 less than the proposed budget we're putting forward tonight. Showing this in a different way, you've got the default budget, our current budget, that is a $689,026 increase. And then the difference between our proposed and our default is the $1,500. There's a report, it's on the website. If you're looking at the website, that shows their default budget versus our proposed budget. And you can see the difference between those lines. Primarily, as you go through the budget, you will see where we've worked very hard to cut where we could. As I said, the largest increase was within that contracted service line. And we had offsetting in out-of-district tuition and transportation. Within the salary line, the difference between the two budgets, the default and proposed, there are some census changes. We've reallocated positions, but the difference between those two lines really represents, one, we are doing a NEASC self-study this year. And NEASC is the organization that does accreditation. And so accreditations are something schools all around the country do. And it's a enriching process. It's a good opportunity for the staff and to look at what they're doing, evaluate that, take that time to then report out, have people come in and give feedback about how we operate and how we're doing business. The other thing is the accreditation as our kids apply to college. It is, we want John Stark to be accredited for that process. It is not looked at well when a school loses accreditation for some reason. So we're embarking in that process, and we do pay people who take on additional obligations during that additional responsibilities because it's an awful lot of work. And so there'll be a steering team that guides that work. And it really, a lot of it is teacher driven. And having gone through it a number of times, it is definitely a worthwhile experience. The other thing that we're doing and putting forward that we feel is pretty important is changing how we do summer school. We are anticipating that there there are going to be more needs this year. And our summer school or remediation has been primarily technology-based. And we see that as problematic coming out of COVID. And so there are additions to our salary lines to pay for staff to work with students over the summer to help make sure they're where they need to be going into next year. The benefits line, that's the $4,000 is associated retirement and GMR related to the increase in salaries. Purchase services, it's the shift from out of district tuition to in-school programming. It's also the coaches, the SAU shares, the district shares. Under our property service line, that is primarily, there are some increases you'll see in our computer repair and maintenance lines, increase to upkeep, repairs, and grounds maintenance. Under other purchase services, that's the cut to out of district tuition. And the other lines are proposing, like the supplies. Gary really sharpened his pencil within the supplies lines so that we can propose additional cuts to offset increases in other lines. That transfers line is the grants and food service. Actually, not food service, right, Chris? In the John Stark?
It's still food service.
It is, okay.
Yeah,
right.
They still operate under the
Thank you.
food service fund.
So as I said before, the increase from this budget to our default is the $689,025. The increase from the default to the proposed is $1,528, getting us to the full proposed increase of $690,553.93. This is the by object, a visual of our proposed budget, and 70% of that is in salaries and benefits. Zach, do you want?
Yeah, why don't we? Yeah, if we want to sort of break up the articles, and we can sort of open it up to some public comment. Or sorry, I'll start with comments or questions from the board, and then move on to sort of the public comment piece, and then we can circle back on the rest of the warrants as well. So, any questions from the board on Article 3? Okay. Excellent. So, and then from members of the public, any questions from members of the public? And I guess what I'll do is I'll remind everybody the way that we will do public comment. And actually, I don't see the.
Because I'm in shared screen, I could come out of it, and if I need to go back in,
you know what? Let's get through the rest of the warrants then, and then
Okay.
I'll open it to public comment. That way we don't have to come back in and out. We're going to get through these warrants pretty quickly. So
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
So the next article is Article 4, which is our collective bargaining agreement. Our teachers came to the negotiations as community members, as neighbors, as partners in this whole challenging year. And they sought only to extend the current contract. And so how teachers' contracts usually work is there's a grid that is negotiated, and the grid of salaries, generally each contract gets richer. And then teachers also move based on their experience and the education that they've invested in themselves. They move on that grid. This year, this represents teachers just moving up within the same contract. And so negotiated no language. This is just teachers moving up one step on the grid. That they are the raises within that, or the increases within that, our teachers are getting if this is passed, between $500 and $1,000, with the average increase being $868, or a average 1.5% increase. One thing I want to note when talking about this is that 7.3 guaranteed maximum increase in our health care insurance, our teachers share, they pay some of the healthcare costs, and so that increase also impacts them, and so they're sharing in those costs. So that's the teacher's contract, and so these are the items with tax impact, and so what I had just presented you, the projected rate for the proposed budget for Henniker is $6.13 per thousand. For Ware is $7.53 per thousand. The warrant article for the collective bargaining unit negotiation is a 4-cent raise in Henniker and a 6 per thousand in Ware. So the projected tax rate increase is 22 cents per thousand in Henniker and 70 cents per thousand in Ware. That is for Henniker, $55 on a $250,000 house, and in Ware, $175.
Okay, guys, before we jump into Article 5 here, is there any other question on the teacher contract and those costs associated with it? The only question I'll have for you, Jackie, if you can just go back one quick slide. So this is inclusive of any revenue projections for the upcoming year as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be double sure. So.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So we, interestingly, John Stark did not experience a decline in enrollment. We're actually up by 3 students from last year. But as I've talked about in each of the other districts, our enrollment's down, and that is having a significant impact on our adequacy funding in the other districts.
Yeah, that was why I
calculate that. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't certain if that was, I couldn't remember where we were here with John Stark. I just wanted to be sure that even though all of the presentation for the budget had everything to do with the expenditure side and sort of the pass-through sort of revenue piece that's here, what we haven't talked about in explicit detail is what we're expecting for unreserved fund balance as well as potential adequacy. But this sort of cuts right to the chase and says this is what the impact would be of these expenditures and all the revenue needed to support it. So
yes, and I'll let Chris speak to that because he actually put together a revenue sheet, which should also be a link on the website.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so the John Stark is still seeing a decrease to their adequacy. So it's a small decrease on the adequacy side for the Henniker portion. And then a $400,000 decrease on the Ware portion. And then there are slight increases on the state education tax. So that there are definitely some revenue shortfalls anticipated for next year as well, for John Stark.
Okay.
But those are reflected in this number.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. I just want to make sure we paused on that while we were talking.
Thank you. I had it written down and didn't.
Any other questions, guys, on this one? Yeah, Jim.
I was just curious. Maybe I'm missing something here, but if the enrollment numbers are basically flat, why do we have less adequacy funding? I don't get it.
It likely has to do with the free and reduced numbers. Which is where we're really crossing our fingers that the calculation is
right.
in some way amended by legislation, because this year everyone's free, so they don't have the incentive to fill out the application.
I didn't realize that was lumped into this. So okay.
Yeah.
And so how this is, I think, pretty fascinating how adequacy is built. There's the base adequacy, $3,700 per child number that we get. And then layered on that is third grade reading scores. If we have students who are below where they need to be for third grade reading, we get additional funds. If we have students who qualify for free and reduced, we get additional adequacy. If we have students who are identified, we get additional adequacy, and that comes to be a really large number. And so Chris referenced free and reduced lunch. This year, the federal government did a waiver allowing us, because of the crisis, to provide meals for any child under 18 in our communities, whether they're in school or not. But because everyone qualifies, they aren't filling out the forms. And without the forms, we don't get credit for that need within our schools, because the adequacy is supposed to help fill the needs within our schools. And so although the needs are being met, I do think a lot of people are hoping, and I hope, that it's a short-term need, and so they don't have to fill out the form, so they're not.
So just a quick note too, a light bulb just kind of struck on me as I was looking at the numbers. I believe that the numbers that we're seeing from 2021 are actually inclusive of the one-time funding that John Stark had decided to put into their capital reserve. They put the warrant out there, and the voters had voted for that. So that number actually aligns pretty well with the amount that got put into that capital reserve. So that's obviously a factor as well.
And there were a lot of districts that decided to just roll that into their operating budget and didn't establish the fund. And the SAU 24 districts chose to do the funds. We had some guidance from the finance committee, and I think that ended up being a very smart.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Good questions, guys. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Go ahead with Article 5, please, Jackie.
Okay, and so the last article is Article 5. And so this is asking the voters to authorize a authority to retain year-end unassigned general funds in an amount not to exceed, in any fiscal year, 5% of the current fiscal year's net assessment. And so it's a contingency fund. The contingency fund idea has been in existence for a long time. Henniker has had one for a long time. Lots of districts have it. Ware and John Stark have not had it. And why we're talking about it again is there were some pretty significant changes that were passed in September to the law that authorizes this fund. And it was a natural time to reconsider whether we wanted to try to establish this. The changes are, it went from 2.5% of the fiscal year's net assessment to 5%, and that is an up to amount. It doesn't mean the board has to put the full 5% in. Chris played out what that full 5% would be looking back for the last 4 years. So you can see, we're upwards of $450,000 is what represents our net assessment, 5% of our net assessment. Once you've established, if you did decide to put in the money, if authorized, if it passed, and then you decided to put in the money each year, he also played out what the change amount would be. So the first change was that it went up from 2.5 to 5%. The next change is it was originally for emergencies, or if authorized by the Commissioner of Education, or if used as a revenue source to reduce the tax rate. And so districts were using it almost as a to release valve to kind of maintain a more steady tax rate. The emergency provision and the authorization by the Commissioner of Education, both of those pieces are out of the new statute. And so, it would be to authorize, to put out there for the public to authorize the John Stark Board to establish this contingency fund. It would then be your authority what goes into it. To spend it, however, you need to have a public hearing, and each year you have to have a report included in the annual report about what you did with the money. Chris, do you have anything to add to that? Because I said you were going to do this one and then I took over. I apologize.
Yeah, just to add the net, just for anyone that might not know, the net assessment, that is the amount of the tax assessment, and then adding in the state education tax dollars that we receive also from the town. So that's what that's calculated on. And just to note, on the municipal side of things, this is actually something that they do from year to year without adopting an RSA. So when this was established, it was looking to give the school districts that flexibility that the towns already have.
Thank you for clarifying that. I referred to it as equalized valuation earlier, and I realized that mistake. So thank you for being clear on what that net assessment figure represents. Okay, this is what we talked about earlier, and there they all are. Any other discussion from the board or thoughts from the board, or Jackie, or have you got anything else to present here?
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So real quick, last call for any questions or thoughts from the board before I open it to public comment. I don't actually hear any. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I just wanted to say I ran into this problem at the HCS hearing. For some reason, I don't know if it's because of a setting in Zoom, but when you go to the participants list, you can't choose to raise a hand. It's not an option.
I was just going to say that, actually. I was just looking to see that is not an option, in fact. You're right.
You're going to have to find a different way for the public to say they'd like to speak.
Yeah, I think without it turning into mayhem here, I think, oh, wait a second. I thought I saw hands
Chris
going
did
up.
it, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
have
have
it as an option. I think it might be whether or not you've downloaded the most recent Zoom client.
All right.
Yeah.
Could
That might be the
people
problem.
Unmute though, maybe.
It says I'm up to date. Well, I'll tell you what. If you have a raise hand button in the participants window, please use it. We'll start with that as the first phase to this. If I don't see anybody raising hands, then I will ask, hopefully without it turning into a pandemonium, that people would unmute themselves and speak. But let's start with seeing if folks have the ability to raise their hand. I don't see anybody rushing to the virtual microphone here. Okay, and then if anybody is still interested in public comment, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and I will call on you.
Okay, I have my hand
hold
up.
on. I've got, yep, Chris. Yep, go ahead.
I just would like to clarify something about Article 5. In the town, we have what's called an overlay or an unexpended fund balance. Is that the equivalent of this reserve in Article 5?
I don't believe so. I believe what you're, I think, maybe referring to is what we would also have as an unreserved fund balance. It's the revenue that is left over at the end of one year and goes into the next year. Is that what you're referring to, or is it a different mechanism?
Well, in the town, it's a requirement to keep a small balance for something such as rebates, or veteran benefits that are unanticipated, unforeseen requirements of ordinances and laws that were already passed.
I see.
And it's maintained at a certain level. And then when the tax rate is set in October, they look at that and determine what amount they need to keep for next year. And so it's a functional fund, and you can't use it for just anything. So I didn't know whether this was equivalent in that way.
Yes, I believe it was intended to be, because there's not such a mechanism for school districts. And so the intention was to create a similar, that similar thing. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, is that when that RSA was adopted, I mean, it might have changed things slightly when the revisions were made this year, removing the emergency nature of it. That's something that we had just been informed of this week by the DOE. So we're kind of still working through that piece of information. But prior to that, the understanding of the fund was always that it was to look to have the same flexibilities as the municipal side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anybody else wish to make public comment? Please unmute yourself. I don't think we have too many other members of the public on the call, candidly. Okay. Seeing that nobody else wishes to come off of mute to speak publicly, I'm going to end the public hearing and resume the rest of our regular school board business for the night. Thank you very much, Jackie, Chris, the rest of the administration for the presentation this evening. Well done.